Welcome to the People Teaching People podcast. Joining me on the podcast is Julie Van Rosendaal. Julie is the Calgary-based author of 12 best-selling cookbooks. She has been the food columnist on the Calgary Eye-Opener on CBC Radio 1 for 17 years. She writes about food for the Globe and Mail, and for the past 20 years has been a freelance food writer and columnist for other publications across Canada. Julie teaches, speaks, and cooks at culinary schools and events across the country and has a very engaged audience on her social media channels and website, Dinner with Julie. I am a huge fan of Julie's. She has been a go-to resource for me whenever the question comes up of what's for dinner. Julie is someone who looks for ways to make a difference for others and then truly takes action. She is passionate about food and making it accessible and enjoyable. In this episode, you'll get some great meal ideas, gain insight into the very real challenge of food insecurity right here in Canada, and see how teaching and learning opportunities are plentiful in the world of food and cooking. Thank you so much for joining me today, Julie.
Thanks for having me.
So I always love to start off by learning more about my guests and their stories. So I'm curious what led you to become so passionate about food and cooking, and also to have so many diverse roles in the world of food. So cook, writer, cookbook author, columnist, teacher, speaker, investigative reporter, and I could go on.
Wow, that makes me sound really busy and impressive. Honestly, I just really love to eat. I've always had a great appetite. My mom likes to tell the story of when I was 3 and I asked when I could cook for myself. And she said, when you can read a recipe for yourself, then you can cook for yourself. So I went off with a stack of cookbooks and learned how to read and came back to her and said, Mom, what's a tubaspa? She's like, what? A tubaspa. She goes, use it in a sentence. Add 2 tubaspa of sugar, tablespoon. Anyway, so it's always been my thing. Always been my thing. When I was a kid, I wanted to be the food editor of Canadian Living magazine. I wanted to work in the test kitchen. I've always been interested in how people eat at home. I didn't want to go to culinary school and become a restaurant chef because it's a different environment. It's a different thing. It's sort of more theater. The hours are terrible. I have a lot of respect for restaurant chefs, but that wasn't my goal. And there weren't a lot of people who were food writers when I was a kid. The landscape has changed a lot over the years, and that's partly why I sort of have so many roles. Is there aren't many staff food writer positions anymore, and once I started writing cookbooks, I needed to start selling cookbooks. So I started doing TV and I started doing radio and just sort of went off in all these different directions. And as a self-employed, freelancer, essentially, I can't put all my eggs in one basket, so to speak.
I hear you on that. And I mean, with your love for food, you really have done so many interesting things, one of which our youngest kiddo, he's 11, took part in. So you have been sharing what you know in so many ways, but also including cooking classes for kids and teens in the Kitchen Club. So what is the Kitchen Club all about? How did it begin? And how do people teach other people how to cook?
Oh boy, we all have so much to learn from each other. And that's one thing that I love about food. There's so much to know. It's impossible to know everything about food. There's always something new, some new technique. It doesn't matter how professional you are, there's always room to learn more. So the Kitchen Club came about earlier in the pandemic, or at the beginning of this year, actually. Beginning of 2022. Geez, how is it? 2022. And schools closed for an extra week at the end of Christmas holidays here in Alberta, just due to pandemic reasonings. There is another rise in COVID cases, and it was so cold. It was like -30, -20. kids couldn't go outside to the playground, couldn't go play with their friends. I just felt so badly for parents having to, fill time for younger kids. I have a 17-year-old. He excels at social distancing. He is just fine hanging out in his room. And so I thought, what's something that I could do to sort of help distract the kids and teach them something at the same time. And so I put it out there on Twitter and Instagram as one does. If anyone wants to hop on Zoom, I'll just set it up in my kitchen and I'll cook along. I'll post some recipes. If anyone wants to cook, we'll do it every day for this first week of January when kids were off school. And the first, I boosted my Zoom account. The first class capped out at 1,000 kids. It was a little bit chaotic.
Wow, that is a lot of kids.
It is a lot of kids. And, of course, I made it free. I want it to be accessible. And, things like cooking should not be limited to kids who can afford it. And kids slogged in from all across Canada. It was so cool. So we did every day that week. And then the Saturday we did an all-day croissant class. Parents are just amazed that their kids made, laminated dough. They made croissants from scratch, because we tend to have this idea of what constitutes kid food, right? Like pizza and cookies and chicken nuggets. And if you ask most kids what they like to eat or what they want to learn to make, it's amazing what they say, right? I want to learn to make hummus. I want roasted salmon. I want Caesar salad. And so people often ask me if I'm going to write a kids cookbook. And I'm like, they're all kids cookbooks. Like all cookbooks are kids cookbooks. So we just, we did all these sort of basic techniques that, it's tricky during a pandemic, and you can't just run to the store for an ingredient, right? And everyone eats differently. People have different, dietary needs, and, maybe they're plant-based, maybe they're not, maybe they can't have gluten. So I tried to make these recipes that could be adapted for a wide variety of tastes and needs, and didn't require going to the store for anything special. And it was so fun. So we continued doing it. We did it every weekend for the whole year up until the summer. We started doing it more sporadically, and now we're back at it for fall, because the kids love it. They, I turn on my Zoom and they're jumping up and down on their little screens, and the teenagers, honestly, I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about it. I love seeing the teenagers. Often they have their cameras off, but sometimes they have them on, and they've got their hoodies. I have a teenager, and I know they're quiet. They have a different demeanor. I was too when I was a teenager, but I just love seeing them log on and seeing them all baking. And a lot of them are baking with their grandparents or a parent or their siblings, or are joining, across the country. A lot of them are waving at their cousins or their friends from another city. And it's just been so great. It's been like the highlight of my year for sure.
Oh, well, you did an amazing job. We loved the cream puffs.
Cream puffs, right? Shoe pastry.
We did. Yeah. Oh, they were delicious. And
Yay.
it is so true. Like Carter, our youngest, loves cooking. So he'll get together with two friends in particular, and they'll have a sleepover and they will bake or cook.
Amazing.
Yeah, they're getting better at the cleaning up part, but yes, yeah.
I'm still
There's
terrible
always that.
I still have not learned the cleaning up part. My mom always taught me to clean as you go, but I still don't. I'm the messiest cook ever, but whatever, it's worth it.
It's all worth it, and it's so much fun.
Yes.
Now, I did a little bit of research. I went to Statistics Canada, actually, because I really didn't have any sort of idea on this. So they reported that between April 2021 and April 2022, the price of food rose actually by 9.7%. So I know we're paying a lot more for groceries these days. I see that every time I go to the grocery store, but I was really shocked to see that number. But along with that, there are 5.8 million Canadians, including 1.4 million children, who live in food insecure households. At least that was in 2021. And I know this is something that you talk about. So I'd love to know some ways that you've try to address, talk about food insecurity, and what can we be doing to help as well?
Oh boy. That is such a big question. It's such a big concern with between the rising food costs and just the uncertainty of the pandemic. So many people have lost their jobs, are uncertain about their jobs. The cost of energy is going up, the cost of transportation. I mean, it's just this domino effect in all directions. And it's really concerning. And so there are a lot of ways we can address food insecurity. Learning how to cook is a big one. Fast food is cheap, but cooking from scratch is cheaper. Knowing what to do with what you have. We also waste 50% of the food that we buy, in Canada. And a lot of that food waste happens, at the farm level and distribution. I mean, there's a lot of places that food gets tossed or is in storage for too long and ends up in compost. But there is a lot that we could prevent at home, and knowing what to do with what we have is a big thing, right? So I actually turned it into a bit of a game with my son. It's sort of a black box challenge, right? Like, we have a half a cauliflower and some kidney beans and some cheese and some eggs. Like, what can we do with this? And when you sort of develop that skill, for a long time, those of us who don't live with food insecurity often approach dinner time from a standpoint of like, what do you feel like eating? I saw this recipe on TikTok, and source the ingredients instead of looking at what you have and thinking, what can I do with it? And so we saw during the pandemic people eating that way, cooking that way more often. But honestly, I'm happy with a baked potato for dinner. I know that there's not protein in baked potato, but it's a great way to sort of stretch leftovers, to stretch small amounts of protein further. Cooking can be very inexpensive. So just developing cooking habits is one thing, but looking to your community and what the needs in your community are, I think is huge. And it's easy to become overwhelmed with all the stuff that's going on in the world, especially during the last few years, I know. And it just seems so big and so insurmountable. And not everybody has the means to write a check, to an agency that addresses hunger. But everyone has schools in their neighborhood. People have, seniors in their neighborhoods. Paying attention to who lives around you. If we all paid more attention to those who are around us and how we could help, and we all have different understandings of what is needed out there. I have a son who's, he's now 17, but he's gone through school. I have a sister who's a principal, and I know that all schools have some level of need in their schools. Obviously, some areas are more high needs than others, but during the pandemic, when schools closed, my first thought was all these kids who rely on food supports at school for often their only meal in a day. And there are a lot of agencies and organizations that are available to adults, but not a lot that are available to kids. And really their access through schools and, youth clubs, swimming pools, places, libraries, places that are safe spaces for kids. But there weren't a lot of food support. So we kind of jumped in, and there were, at the time, the very beginning of 2020, there was a lot of surplus food with all the restaurants closing, with the culinary schools closing, coffee shops, everything. There was a lot of extra food being redistributed, and we opened up one of the restaurant kitchens. Of course, all the restaurants were closed, but the kitchens were, their kitchens were sitting there, and we started just cranking out lunches and organizing pop-ups. There were 12, 13 pop-ups around the city eventually, and just, volunteers, right? And I think often people just want to know what they can do, right? So planting that seed and having an idea, and just, even if you don't know how to do it, ask questions, ask around. Hey, there's a community hall. How can we access that? Go to your library. Can we do something here? Can we have a cooking class? dignity is so important, right? And to organize a cooking class in an area perhaps that has a higher need so that anyone can join, um, and learn to cook and have a meal. There are just so many ways we can share food. Um, and people have so many great ideas and often don't know how to execute them, but just ask around and just do it. Just figure it out and do it. And those little things, little initiatives collectively make a big difference, and they build community and they build relationships. And it's not just about the food, but it's about the personal connections and letting people of all ages know that they're thought of and that they're cared about.
Yeah, no, I love how you've given us some great strategies that we can use just on a personal level with our family. So I love the idea of looking at your ingredients versus starting with the recipe and realizing you don't have half of the things. What do you already have?
Yeah.
And then also that looking outward. And it can sometimes be so easy to get caught in our own bubbles, right? The things that we're doing day to day, but just to do that looking around and paying attention. And then, as you said, have that idea, ask questions, get curious, and see where it can kind of go. You don't need to have all the stuffs figured out all at once in the beginning.
Exactly. And you never know what connections other people have or what they know. And it's easy to ask someone what they need, if there's something they can do, if there's something they need. It's hard to ask for help, but it's easy to ask if someone, if you could be of assistance in any way.
No, those are great ideas, and I really appreciate you sharing that. Now, in February 2021, you posted a tweet, maybe a little bit of a question, about how something was up with our butter supply and how it was no longer soft at room temperature, and it kind of went viral.
Yeah. It kind of did. It exploded. But it had been a conversation for a while. It was something that a few people had asked me. A CBC listener had asked quite a while before that. People were just talking about what's up with butter. It's firmer at room temperature, and it's something I noticed as a culinary instructor. I was doing pie classes at the cookbook company, and noticed that the butter was the right temperature or the right texture at room temperature for making pie. It was sort of, putty like, malleable. And then as a recipe writer, I used to say, butter at room temperature if you needed to cream it, but I noticed that it wasn't soft enough to cream. So I was starting to say, butter softened instead of butter. Anyway, so it was something that was on my radar, and I've been checking out, and I, spoke to my editor at the Globe and Mail and was like, hey, I'm going to look into this. Like, I think there might be a story. And she's like, great, let me know what you find out. And so I sort of dove into it and tweeted, the question, like, is everyone noticing this? Is it limited to one area? Is it limited to a brand? But it was so, across the board, everyone was like, I thought our house was just cold. And, we almost got a divorce because we're arguing about the temperature of our house. And so it seemed to be a thing. So I dove into it and found a connection between the palmitic acid supplements that are commonly used in the dairy industry and the increase in saturated fat and, a change in the fatty acid profile, which would change the texture of butter. If you look at fats, the more unsaturated they are, the more liquid at room temperature. So canola oil, olive oil, they're very unsaturated. They're liquid at room temperature. And then you look at, butter, animal fats, coconut oil that are really saturated, they're firmer at room temperature. So it stood to reason that it was a change in the fatty acid profile that changed the texture of butter. And what would change the fatty acid profile? A change in the feed. And so I wrote a story about it in the Globe and Mail. It really caught on. Jimmy Fallon made a joke about it.
Whoa.
I know. I hoped to make a Weekend Update on Saturday Night Live, but it did not make Weekend Update. But yeah, everyone was talking about butter. I think partly everyone was just so tired of the pandemic. It was something new. And but it was around the world. It was on the BBC. It was in the New York Times. Like, it's just crazy. It definitely did go viral. Yes.
And I believe you referred to it as Buttergate.
I did not coin that
Okay.
phrase. No,
okay.
somebody on that initial tweet thread used Buttergate. It was inevitable, so it did turn into Buttergate. I never used the hashtag because I found it was disrespectful to the industry, and I didn't want to sensationalize it. I really spent a lot of time researching. It's a really complex industry, the dairy industry in Canada. And I really wanted to understand the science behind it. I spoke to farmers and, livestock nutritionists and, processors and industry people. And it was just so huge. And journalistically, I needed to be fair and really investigate the how and why and not vilify anybody, and so I never used the hashtag. Sorry, that was a long answer.
No, that's good. I appreciate that. Now, and you obviously learned a great deal in doing that investigating. And I think sometimes we don't always think so much about where our food is coming from. Mm-hmm. And this definitely gets people thinking a little bit about kind of the processes and the journey it takes to come to our homes. So what learning opportunity do you think this highlights for consumers when it comes to our food?
Well, it was definitely an eye-opening experience for me, as well as, for consumers who often, the extent of their knowledge is marketing. I mean, the food industry spends billions and billions of dollars, trillions probably on marketing. And so a lot of what we know or what we understand about the food system is what we read on packages, the graphics, the image of the little red barn and the rolling fields, and ignorance is bliss. A lot of the time we buy our food, we want to feel good about our food choices, right? And advertisers know that. And so a lot of marketing is geared towards making us feel good about what we buy and what we eat. So this was an eye-opener. It was interesting to see how it traveled, in the media, and how the story was simplified. And, it was tough to write in a way that people didn't just glaze over, right? Like they understood the palmitic acid and the supplements and why and how much and how it's changed. And so often I would hear, oh, have you heard they're putting palm oil in butter? And it's like, no, they're not. If that was the case, it would have to be on the ingredient list. But yeah, I think it was interesting to learn about this practice. And it was interesting to witness the response from the dairy industry, the Dairy Farmers of Canada and the Quebec dairy producers right away asked farmers to stop using the supplements. And it was like, oh, wow, there was a response. And it was, they put together a working group to look into the existing research and look for gaps and advise. And it didn't really amount to a whole lot, but they responded, right? Which was nice.
Yeah, it is nice. And there is so much learning that comes in all aspects of our life. And I think just having that curiosity to maybe understand things a little bit better, or to think a little bit more about where things come from. This summer, our family was in Costa Rica and we went to a coffee plantation, and my eyes were sure opened, and it sure made me even more thoughtful about the coffee that I drink each morning and what coffee I decide to purchase, and just kind of being there and seeing where it comes from and understanding that a little bit better.
I bet.
Now, I'm not going to lie. For me, one of the most stressful decisions of my day is what to make for dinner. I find that sometimes very overwhelming, and even just the meal preparation itself, when we've got like 2 kids needing to go to hockey and 1 to swimming, and we're trying to juggle everything, and then not everybody likes the same things as well. So, do you have any suggestions about how to make food and cooking more accessible and maybe even a little more enjoyable in some of these types of situations?
Oh, yeah. I think for a long time, cooking was sort of lumped in with cleaning, right? Cooking and cleaning, it was like a chore. I don't know who put those two together because they are not in the same category in my mind. But I think, even for people who enjoy cooking, it can be a lot to try and decide, like just the decision, right, of what to make for dinner. So a lot of people do meal planning, or, have different solutions. When I was growing up, I have two sisters, and the three of us each had an evening a week where they had to make dinner. We had to make dinner. We had to choose a menu. We would let my mom know, what to pick up. And it was great. It was, it gave us a little bit of, a chance to make what we wanted, a chance to show off a little bit, and, so that, I think that's a good idea for anyone with kids. I keep trying to instate that with my son, but it's like, I don't know, when there's only one and I'm cooking all the time anyway, he cooks with me a lot. And I think it's a great way to spend time with your kids, away from the screen. I mean, obviously there's a lot of cooking resources, recipes, and YouTube videos that you can learn from. Often I suggest that parents bring kids to the library and look at cookbooks, right, and pick some cookbooks and choose a recipe to try, and then you get to practice reading and math and following directions and cooking science. Like there's so many things that to learn, right, from cooking, and it doesn't feel as much like learning as maybe sitting in the classroom or other ways of learning. And and honestly, we can learn so much from just being in the kitchen with other people who are cooking, right? So if they're doing their homework in the kitchen while you're cooking, they just you pick up a lot. And I think there's a great opportunity going to other people's houses for dinner, say, not just being there when dinner's finished, but being there for the cooking process. I love to learn from friends who have different backgrounds than I do. I will seek out, how to make pierogies, or, how to make all kinds of things from people who have grown up making these dishes. And so yeah, cooking together and eating together are so good for our well-being, our mental and physical health, but we also can just learn little bits as we go. Every time we make a meal, there's an opportunity to learn something new.
Well, and I think, as you said, kind of looking outside of yourself again, right? Going to the library or asking a friend or being a part of cooking at somebody else's home. Because I think we tend to sometimes get stuck in a rut. Like we've kind of got our list of meals that we make. Yes. And yeah, we're just looking for some other ideas and some new inspiration. And sometimes those great ideas kind of re-energize us, right? And help us with figuring out what to make for dinner tonight.
It's true. And yeah, just the decision making, especially during the pandemic, I think people were just tired of deciding what was for breakfast, what was for lunch, what was for dinner every day. And the amount of dishes. I had friends who were like, honestly, I'm choosing things based on the number of dishes they require. So, tacos, because I don't even need, I can just eat the plate, right?
Exactly. Less dish options. I love that. Yes, there can be so many dishes, especially with some types of meals for sure. Mm-hmm. Now, we've got fashion trends and decor trends, and then, of course, food trends. So what's trending these days in the world of food?
Oh boy, there's always something. And there are, the short-term trends like the unicorn frappuccino or the, charcoal ice cream that I think are driven by TikTok and Instagram. And, certainly right now there are the butterboard. Have you seen the butterboards that have been trending? So yeah, it's, I mean, a couple of years ago, it was just, charcuterie boards, but anything, dessert boards, candy boards, breakfast boards, food on a board that you can nibble from, which is a good idea, right? Especially during a pandemic when you're kind of grazing and missing going to parties, and so the butter board, which is it's an old idea, but it resurfaced recently. And it's essentially soft butter spread on a board and, scattered with, I think the one that was making the rounds was like figs and herbs and edible flowers or something. But you could put anything on anything goes with butter, compound butters, ingredients mixed into butter to flavor them. Sort of same idea, only spread on a board. And so, yeah, that's a big thing right now. But we're also seeing sort of bigger shifts in the way we eat, sort of bigger food trends, like the shift towards more plant-based. People are paying far more attention to the environmental impact of our food choices, and so those are sort of greater shifts that are more long-lasting and aren't going to go away as fast as a unicorn frappuccino or a butter board.
So, and with that sort of trend or shift towards that more plant-based diet or way of eating, do you have some ideas of good ways to incorporate more plants into our diets, or some neat ideas that you've seen out there?
Yeah, I think, a lot of it is just mindset, sort of getting into the habit of not thinking of an animal protein first and then everything else as sides. I think we all could eat more pulses, more beans, more chickpeas, more lentils. They're so inexpensive and so good for us. They're high in protein and they're high in fiber. They're good for the land. They're good for farmers. They fix the nitrogen in the soil, so they're good for crop rotation. They are shelf stable, whether they're dried or canned. They are found in cuisines all around the world. They're so versatile. And in Canada, those of us who haven't, grown up eating them tend to be intimidated by the idea of soaking the dried beans. You don't have to soak them. You can just cook them. There's no need to pre-soak them, especially lentils. Lentils cook so quickly. And so, yeah, especially right now when animal proteins are, connected with climate change and environmental impact, and they're expensive, but you can get a can of chickpeas for $1, and I love making falafel. I love so many dishes with beans. So, I tend to sneak them into things now, and people always ask, like, are there beans in this? I'll bring up like a pie. Are there beans? Are there lentils in this?
Is one of those people David Gray by chance?
Oh yes, David Gray for sure. Yes, because he famously was not a fan of lentils and would talk about it. So a few years ago, maybe 2018, we decided that I would sneak lentils into everything I made. So David was the host, recently retired host of the Calgary Eye Opener. And I do a column every week. So every week I made something that I snuck lentils into and didn't tell him. And we recorded his responses. And then Paul Karchet, the director at the time, put together all the clips of him saying, oh, this is delicious. This is fantastic. Oh, I love this. And then we played it back for him on April Fool's Day. So from January until April Fool's Day, every Tuesday, I put lentils in to something. It was the best.
That's amazing. And he had no idea.
No idea. Yeah.
Well, and I do know you have a specific cookbook that focuses on cooking with beans.
Mm-hmm.
It happens to be on my cookbook shelf.
Nice.
Spilling the Beans, is that right?
That's right. Yeah. That was, maybe 2012 that book came out. Yeah. It was a fun one to write. Because most bean cookbooks out there are sort of older and vegetarian, and you don't have to be vegetarian or vegan to eat beans.
Yeah, no, that's definitely one of my go-to cookbooks, especially for a night where we're not eating meat. So, yeah.
Yay!
Now, one of my favorite go-to recipes of yours, and I shared this with you, is your orzo salad with spinach and feta and lemon. And anytime I've made it and other families or people have had some, they always ask for that recipe.
Yay.
And I also love listening to your segments on the CBC Eye Opener because I always get great ideas. It sparks my mind for what to make that night for dinner. So what would be 1 or 2 recipe ideas that people could make for dinner tonight if they're feeling fresh out of ideas or kind of stuck in a rut?
Oh, gee. It kind of depends on what you have. You know, everyone's pantry is different. I often make an omelet. My son makes great omelets, and you can fill it with whatever you have. I love putting things on toast. I love making curries with any form of tomato, frozen tomato, canned tomatoes, passata, pureed tomatoes, any kind of veggie, any kind of pulses, kidney beans, chickpeas, meat, seafood, whatever you eat does well in a curry. I know curry is a very broad, a very broad term, but I often make that, and I make naan. I make a fast naan bread. It's just like flour and baking powder, a little bit of oil or butter and water, cooked in a really hot skillet. Poached eggs on toast was my mom's go-to. Scrambled eggs and brown beans or poached eggs on toast was my mom's go-to when we were kids. And it was like, probably once or twice a week we would have that. And yeah, and pastas are easy too, just like really quick pasta. I often make like breadcrumb pasta, which is like lots of garlic. Garlic is in season right now, and the garlic is so good. I mean, garlic, people often don't pay attention to it, but when it's good, it's so much better than, in the middle of winter when your garlic options are limited. So garlic breadcrumbs, the heel of your bread, whiz it into crumbs and pasta and, some cheese. You can throw in some bits of leftovers. I mean, there's so many ways you can dress pasta. I love doing peanut sauce. Peanut sauce and crispy tofu is one of my favorite things right now. And tofu is, a really inexpensive protein. And I recently discovered I love crispy tofu. Every recipe out there calls for extra firm tofu, which makes sense because it has less moisture, and moisture is the enemy of crispiness. But I find the texture is a little bit more rubbery. And I like really creamy inside, crispy outside. So once I started using medium tofu, not too soft because it's hard to cut into cubes, and I pat it dry, roll it around in cornstarch, and crisp it up in a skillet. It's so good. It's so delicious, and you can serve it all kinds of ways. Peanut sauce is one of my favorite things to eat just on anything. Peanut sauce on noodles or on, spaghetti noodles or on tofu. And I just, when the peanut jar gets low, I add some soy sauce, some rice vinegar or lime juice, some a little bit of honey or brown sugar, garlic, ginger, a bit of heat. If you like things spicy, some, chili flakes or sriracha, shake it up in the jar, and it keeps, for ages in the fridge, but I just eat it on everything. So those are my suggestions.
Those are amazing. Those are fantastic suggestions. And now I'm really craving peanut sauce with tofu. But yeah, I've always bought the more firm. So, and have found it to be a little rubbery. So I'm going to have to try something a little bit softer.
Yes.
That's a really good tip. Thank you. Now, I wanted to ask you about, maybe to look back a little bit, to a favorite teacher or learning experience that you've had, and why that person or experience stands out for you.
Oh boy. I had so many great teachers. And I love running into them now, yeah, I had a lot of great teachers. And I had one learning experience that really stuck out. And it's probably not the greatest learning experience I had, but for me, it stuck in my mind, probably because it involved food and writing. And it was in grade, I don't know, 4 or 5, and we had to write instructions on how to make a peanut butter sandwich. And so the times were different. It was a peanut butter sandwich, and we made the peanut butter sandwiches. So what our teacher did was we'd each have to write down how to, not in a recipe form, but just instructions how to make a peanut butter sandwich. And the teacher took each page, and she had a loaf of bread and some peanut butter and jam, and read the instructions and followed the instructions exactly. And if you ended up with a peanut butter sandwich, you got to eat it. It's so crazy that it was actually peanut butter. And it's just occurring to me now that, like, wow, there was actually peanut butter in school at the time. And I think I was the only one who ended up with a finished peanut butter sandwich, because kids would write, like, put the peanut butter on the bread. And so she'd take the jar of peanut butter and put it on the loaf of bread, and everyone would laugh, right? But it was a great lesson in being really thorough with your words and explaining exactly what you mean. And so it was like, open the jar, dip in the knife, take out a piece of bread, spread the peanut butter on one side of one piece, so it was funny. It really stuck in my mind, and it was useful.
Do you remember who that teacher was?
I think it was Miss Fraser, but I don't know if I'm remembering.
No, that's amazing. I personally love a good peanut butter sandwich, and it's what a great way for your teacher, in a very engaging way that stuck with you, to get everyone thinking about their writing and how they're describing things, and maybe some of the assumptions that they were making by not laying out all the steps and information that they needed to. Mm-hmm. That is a very good teacher.
Yes. Yeah, it was good. It was a good one.
Now, you've had lots of unique experiences and lots of success along your journey. So when you look back at your journey so far, what would something be that you are most proud of?
Oh, most proud of? Oh, boy. I guess I should probably say my son. Very proud of him. I know that's what you're talking about, though. What am I most proud of? Oh, that's a good question. So I guess if I've said something that makes people feel more comfortable in the kitchen, that makes it all worthwhile for me. So I had the parent of one of the kids in the kitchen club sent me a picture of her child's school project, and she had to do a presentation on someone she admired, and she picked me. And so she did a collage with some pictures of me, and she wrote, Julie says, there isn't one, sorry, I'm going to try and remember what it is that I say. There isn't one right way and one wrong way to make something. There's a whole bunch of different ways, and it's not, they're not right or wrong. Just understanding why you're doing what you're doing and doing what you like or doing what works for you is what makes a difference. But she wrote, Julie says, there isn't a right way and a wrong way to make things. There's just a whole bunch of different ways, right? And I'm getting all goosebumpy just thinking about it. And it's like, they're listening, yay, because food, I think cooking skills are important. We have to feed each other for our whole lives and ourselves. And I just, it's sort of a wasted opportunity if you aren't able to do it yourself and feed other people. It's such a great way to show affection and support, and it's something that we can all do every day. It doesn't have to be every day, but we have opportunities every day. So I guess when I hear things like that, that's what I'm the most proud of.
That is just beautiful. And what a beautiful message that she took with her from you, because that in itself makes food and cooking and all that more accessible, because you don't have to fit in a box or approach it. You can be you and be who you are and do it your way. I think that is just amazing. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, I think it's important because we get, especially when, I write recipes for a living, but I think often when you see a recipe, it suggests that this is the way to do it. And if you stray from, 1 teaspoon of thyme or a tablespoon of oil, it's going to not work. Right. And so There's not one right way. There's not one right way and a whole bunch of wrong ways. I guess that's what it was. Yeah. Good to
Well,
remember.
and I think that's one of the reasons why I love listening to your segments on the Eye Opener, because it's not so definitive. Like the way that you describe a recipe, you could add this, or you might, mix this in, or you might not, or you could serve it with rice or potatoes, or it's very flexible, and it makes me think, okay, you know what? I could actually make that tonight. That is doable and not outside of the realm of possibility for me. So I appreciate your flexible approach and accessible approach to food and cooking very much.
Oh, good.
Now I have a few rapid fire questions for you. Okay, so what is something that you would love to learn about, or something that you would love to learn how to do?
Oh, I always wish that I was a painter. I know if you paint, then technically you're a painter, but I just wish I was better at it. I have some friends who are great painters, and my mom is a great painter. I would love to do that. And my son used to do improv. He sort of stopped during the pandemic, but he did it over at Loose Moose Theater. And anytime we go to a show at Loose Moose, I think, oh, I would love to do that. It looks like so much fun. I don't know if I would be brave enough to. You have to really think on your feet, but it just looks like so much fun.
What is a place that is at the top of your travel bucket list?
Oh, I really would like to go back to Belgium. I went when I was 15. My dad immigrated from Belgium when he was a kid. The food is amazing. The beaches are amazing. And I would love to go back there.
What is a book, podcast, or TV show that you've enjoyed recently?
Oh, I really loved watching Only Murders in the Building with Steve Martin and Martin Short and Selena Gomez. I just finished watching. There's two seasons, and it was really, really good.
Not heard of that one. Might need to check it out. Sounds good. If you could sit down and have a conversation with someone that you'd love to learn from, who would it be and why?
Oh boy, this is a hard one. You know what? Every time I'm asked this, I think of my grandma, who I learned a lot from, but I didn't learn as much as I could have. She was a really amazing, amazing cook. But yeah, I would really. Oh, is it cliche to say Nigella Lawson? I really like her. I'd love to learn just how she navigates life. I don't know. I feel like I'm going to come up with a way better answer to this question in the middle of the night.
You can always send me an email and I can add it in.
Like, oh, she says this.
These two and
this person is way more, there's so many interesting people and so many stories. I sometimes get panicky that, I'm not going to meet everybody. I'm not going to learn from everybody. And there's just so many people that I'd love to just sit down around the table with and learn from,
Yeah, there sure are many interesting people in this world, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Now, education truly plays such an important and integral role in all facets of our lives, how we work, live, play, explore, and cook, and be a part of the world of food. Do you have any final thoughts or words of wisdom that could empower or support people in their own teaching and learning journeys?
Oh boy. I think just being open to new ideas and really conscious of the bubbles that we tend to create for ourselves, I think that often it limits our perspectives, and really everyone we meet, we have an opportunity to learn something from, right? So trying to expand our circle of people that we spend time with, doing it in a different way, maybe going for walks together or cooking together instead of just going for coffee or having dinner together, doing different things, even having a dinner club where one family or person or friend group teaches the rest how to make a thing, or there're just so many fun things that we could do to spend time together, but to also learn. It doesn't have to be a structured learning environment. We learn just by living, and everyone knows something that they can share, right? It might not feel like you know a lot, but there's stuff. We all know stuff we can share.
We all really do. Mm-hmm. Julie, thank you so much for sharing your time and your story and your words of wisdom with us today. If our listeners want to learn more about you and all the things that you're up to, where are the best places to find you?
Well, my handle is Dinner with Julie on all the social media platforms. So I'm easy to find.
Perfect. I'll make sure to share that. Thank you so much for joining me. It was great to connect with you and to learn from you.
Thanks for having me. That was so much fun.